So I'm an entrepreneur. I've set up two companies, one called Isocore, which we took public on NASDAQ. It was on email, and the second company was on mobile payments, and it was called Valista. We set up an operation here. So I have a background in technology. I have set up technology companies, and now I'm a professor, and I teach entrepreneurial studies. So today I'm going to talk to you about design thinking, and I'm going to do a very quick experiment here. Do you want to pass them out? So every one of you will get a Lego duck. You're free to take it home with you. And I want to give you 1 minute. Okay, I'm going to give you. So now open the packet. You should see 6 pieces, and would you just try to create a duck, right? I'm going to give you 1 minute. This is not a trick question. It's really simple. Just make a simple duck. Okay? Will you just put them on the table? And what this experiment actually shows, and if you look around around the people around your table, you will find that everybody has more than likely got a very different looking duck, right? And that actually, what it says really is that creativity really thrives on very limited resources. So, sometimes we feel we need huge amount of resources to be creative, but every one of you have managed to create a duck, and each of the ducks look very different, right? So there are so many different ducks. So what this also says is that there are many solutions to a given problem. Sometimes we think there's only one solution, but there are many, many solutions to a given problem. And I wonder if anybody tried to do the duck differently, right? And I think you have. So have you done this duck before, by the way?
No.
Fantastic. So he did it upside down. How many of you actually did this upside down duck? Do you know, normally you take the bricks this way, but did anybody, we have a genius here, but any other geniuses around that did this duck upside down? No? Nobody? So really what I'm trying to get you to start thinking about is, we are programmed to think that only this way is going to work, and every time it's got to work in a particular way. And what I'm trying to do here is to tell you that it's possible to start looking outside of the box and then start to figure out how you might create a different type of solution. And remember that there is not just one solution, that there are multiple solutions. And that's really the basis. So this isn't about design thinking, right? This is just a little creativity exercise, and it will soon make sense as to why I'm doing this. So constraints are always the enemy of innovation, right? And as you saw, with just 6 bricks, you are all able to create a different duck. And sometimes we say we don't have enough money, we don't have enough resources, we can't be creative, but actually you can most definitely be creative. So I'm going to give you, now hopefully that's been an icebreaker, and you're all ready to listen to an introduction on design thinking. I skipped one slide, which I think I should just talk a bit about, because since I'm in Sri Lanka, I don't know if you can see this particular slide, but this is a slide from the World Economic Forum, and what it is saying here is that the evolution of the Earth's economic center of gravity, which, many, many years ago, AD 1, used to be around our area, and then in the 1960s, it's more around Europe, And in 2000, it's shifting back towards Asia. And in 2023, it will be slap bang in the middle around our area. So just be aware that the economic center of gravity, you are sitting right next to it, right? So huge opportunity for you guys who are living here in Sri Lanka. So now let me go into talking about design thinking. When I first came, I was asked to give a talk on innovation. Actually, it wasn't a talk, it was a workshop, a 2-day workshop on innovation for what we call the guards in Ireland. I'm based in Ireland, Dublin, Ireland. We call them guards, here we call them police. For the police force, for the senior inspectors, and there were about 60 of them. And I was wondering, what am I going to teach police about innovation? And then I was already familiar with design thinking, and I said, wow, I think I'm going to start by doing a short workshop, a half-day workshop on design thinking with them. And this was the result. But they came back, which really surprised me. It completely floored me, because you can't probably see this because of a problem I'm having here with my screen. But what they're saying here is that the ground rules were the same as outlined earlier, but what they saw was the level of enthusiasm, because you get everybody involved in when you're doing a design thinking. The boss isn't always right, nor does he have the best ideas. Actually, this, I think, is a very serious problem from my past experience of working in Sri Lanka, because the Sri Lankan culturally, we always think that the boss is always right? So here, we need to start thinking that the boss isn't always right. And design thinking promoted a sense of inclusion among all process owners and created a desire to succeed. And adopting a collaborative approach, I was afforded an opportunity to understand the needs of the different stakeholders, right? And this is coming back from the team that there were 60 police officers, and after they finished the course, and then they went back, they had a little exercise to do, and they started to use design thinking in the police force, and then they came back with this feedback. So it's really a very, very powerful tool. And the key message here is seeing is not believing. Believing is seeing. You see things not as they are, but as you are, right? So that's one of the big problems, right? You see things not as they are, but as you are. And hopefully that might give you an idea of what the message I'm trying to get across, right? You don't see things as they really are. And that's the challenge that we have. And what design thinking does is it helps to bring your creative mind and your analytical thinking together, and you bring both of them to solve a very specific problem, okay? And actually, it's both experimental and iterative, right? And it is a process, okay? Let's say if you were going to design a children's toothbrush, how would you go about trying to design a children's toothbrush, right? And you would probably do that by really trying to figure out what a child might be looking like without really from your perspective, not from the child's perspective. But really, for children, you know, they are not just scaled-down versions of ourselves, because they have chubby little fingers and have less dexterity. So IDEO, who is one of the design thinking organizations, when they came to design a children's toothbrush, I don't know if you can see it from there, essentially came up with something like this. And the whole idea here is that often when we go to design products, we start to think of what the solution is, looking at it from our context, without sitting down and really trying to understand what is it that the user is really looking for. And we heard examples of that in the earlier, with the first keynote, right? He was talking about really sitting in the shoes of somebody and really trying to understand what that user really is looking for. And that's what design thinking is all about. And it has 5 steps. It's a very simple concept. It's all common sense, but very few of us really follow common sense, right? First of all, you have to really empathize, really sit in the shoes of a customer and really understand what it is like for the customer. And that is really empathy, right? And then you start to define what, you define a product, then you start to come up with different ideas, then you prototype and test it. Now, the top title on my presentation said Design Thinking and Design Sprint, but really I'm not going to talk about Design Sprint because we don't really have enough time. If you'd given me 2 hours, I would definitely talk a bit more about Design Sprint as well. But Design Sprint essentially uses the concepts of design thinking. And one of the core tenets of Design Sprint, one of the main rules around it, is they talk about being alone and together. And actually, you should try this out, by the way. It really works very well. Because when you work together as a group, often the person who speaks the loudest or the person who's most articulate is the person that people stop to listen to. So when we are running design sprints, we use this basic principle of alone together. And what that means is we get people to, first of all, come up with solutions themselves by their own, and then sit down and then jointly agree. We talk about voting for the right solution, right? So just think about that's a very interesting thing that came out of design thinking. So I want to touch a little bit more empathy, and I'll give you a short example here too. I must keep an eye on the time. I was invited for dinner, for lunch actually, for one of my old colleagues, and I went to her place with my wife. And the interesting thing is, so at some point in time, by the way, this is a toilet joke. In Sri Lanka, we are quite used to toilet jokes. It doesn't necessarily go very well in Ireland, but I say it all the same. So my wife goes into the toilet, right? And she comes back out, and she tells my friend Dara, who's a single girl, that her apartment was fantastic, right? Every room had different wallpaper. It was matching. It was really, really nice. And she comes out of the toilet and she says, that's a fantastic photograph. There is a photograph there in the toilet of herself and her niece. And she says, that's fantastic. It's really nice. I really like that photograph. About an hour later, I go into the toilet, right? And then there I am doing a pee, and these 2 girls are staring at me. And it was an extremely different experience for me. So I went back to Dara and I said, Dara, you have to take that photograph away from there. And that's what I mean by empathy, because it was 2 different experiences. And really understanding somebody else's experience is very difficult, even though we think it is easy. To really understand somebody else's experience, you nearly have to do exactly what they do to really learn from it. And that's what empathy is all about, right? Because we start to see things not as they are, but as we are. And that was a very simple example I just wanted to illustrate about why empathy is so important. So in design thinking, we always have this test at the end. So because we are really getting feedback, and then we try out, and that's the whole idea. And you heard earlier on about lean startup. And even in lean startup, you have build, measure, and learn. And the whole idea is you come back, you learn from small iterations, okay? It's a great example of bringing together different people to design a shopping cart, right? And really what it actually does, at the end of the exercise, it does they come up with a shopping cart, and good example of how design thinking is used. But an interesting question, and this was a question that was asked in one of my classes, and people asked me, so how come we don't see this shopping cart in our supermarkets anymore? And I've had to think about what that means, because here I am telling people, design thinking is fantastic. We can come up with some great new product ideas, but sometimes those product ideas may be good, but there may be cultural shifts happening. So the big cultural shift that has happened in the Western world, and maybe it is actually true on this side of the world as well, is people no longer go to supermarkets to do big shops, because we get supermarkets everywhere. Actually, as it happens, right across our house here in Colombo, there is a supermarket. So people now just go in, get what they want, right? And they take that, and then they go home. So the need for those huge, big shopping carts have gone away. So that's something else that you need to be also aware of, right? Just be aware of the fact that at this moment in time, you may have come up with a great product, but there may be shifts coming downstream that may render your product obsolete. Okay, so I want you to think now, and we can't really do this as a challenge, but I want you to think of a particular challenge so that I can now start to walk you through how you might start to use design thinking to solve this problem. So one of the big problems that we have in the modern world, right, is this, right? People are eating a lot of garbage, right? So, and there's a lot of sugar out there, and this is what the shape of things to come, right? So how do you solve this problem? Can we use design thinking to solve this problem, right? So you might think of marketing it by saying no, we have big banner ads and say no at the shop, and you won't have to say it at home. So let's beat child obesity, because this is actually a very, very serious problem, by the way, right? A very serious problem. I don't know if it's a problem in this side of the world, but it's a very serious problem in the Western world, and it's a huge problem in the US, right? So here it is, say no to biscuits, sweets, and crisps every day. So you might do something like this, right? But the key here is to figure out how you can design the joy of healthy eating. So you're really trying to get into the shoes of whom you're trying to design it for, which is really the kids, and figure out how do you make this more appealing so that they're not really starting to ask for sweets all the time, right? So trying to make the undesirable irresistible, right? So that's what you're trying to do. So you're really trying to get into their shoes and really make something just so irresistible so that kids will start to eat more healthy food. So what's going to be your approach? So the first thing you need to do is to clearly understand what's the problem you're trying to solve. Understand, right? So you as developers, when I was a developer, we used to always think in terms of what's the solution, right? Even to this day, when I talk, I have to program myself to saying, let's start to first clearly understand what's the problem, right? Understand what's the problem. And you do this through an empathy exercise, which is really trying to get into the shoes of your customer and really understanding what are the problems that they're having. Okay? So empathy is seeing with the eyes of another, listening with the ears of another, and feeling with the heart of another. Right? That's the empathy phase. Right? And to do that, you might want to do what we call body storming. That's really trying to sit in their shoes. You might do some research, or certainly look at observing and trying to learn. Right. This is a really great example, and unfortunately, two of my best videos I can't show here. I've run into some problems. And this is interesting because this guy was out there in Indonesia. I think it was Indonesia, it doesn't matter, but wherever it was, essentially, they found that there is a problem with iron, that people were not taking enough iron, so there was an iron deficiency. And so he was trying to figure out, how do we solve this problem? So initially, he said, I know what we'll do, because the people were cooking in aluminum utensils, so there was no iron coming through that either. So he came up with an iron block, and he said, okay, we'll take this iron block, put it in the utensil, so people can start to cook using this iron block right at the bottom. So out of that iron block, iron was being released into their food. And what they found when he went back, and he was really happy because he said, this really solves the problem. And he went back, and he found that people started to use the iron block as a doorstop, or to put books on top, or as a holder, and nobody really wanted to use the iron block in cooking. And then he went and did more research. And he found that these guys, and I think it was Indonesia, the Indonesians had what they called a lucky charm. The fish was a lucky symbol, right? So what he came up with is he designed an iron fish, right? And people were very happy to put the iron fish, a little fish that's made out of iron, into their cooking. And that solved the problem, right? So that again, that we call by doing two things. If I go back to this, right? He was observing and listening. He went there, he checked out, and then what he did was he had to do some research to find out, now, what is it that will get these people to start using iron in the way that they're meant to, right? So we spoke about body storming, really walking a mile in their shoes. We spoke about research, and then trying to figure out how you observe and listen. And that is primarily around constantly having conversations. And this is a real problem for most people, because most people are not good listeners, right? And that's the way our mind works, right? Because we immediately jump to conclusions, right? And we immediately say, okay, this is what this person is saying. So you have to shift your thinking into starting to think that what you really need to do is to really listen to people, right? And that is not as easy as it sounds, is to really sit down and listen and have conversations with people, okay? And we say, talk to as many people as possible, minimum chat to 10. In this concept of what we talk about in a design sprint, we say to talk to 5 of your major customers, because 5 customers will give you 85% of their needs. Research has shown can give you 85% of the needs. And if you talk to any more, all you're getting is just another 15%, and it's not dramatically increasing. But 5 key customers, 5 of your key customers, to be able to go and talk to them and understand what their issues are. and try to bring in diversity. And diversity really is not just purely males and females, but it's about different people who think differently, who have different viewpoints, and try to bring that to understand more clearly what's the problem you're trying to solve. We are really trying to understand what people think and feel, and constantly ask the question, why? Why? In the Toyota scheme, they talk about the 5 whys to really keep asking why, until you finally understand the real why behind the problem. Also, don't be afraid to say why not, right? And as we saw in the case of the Indonesian with the lucky fish, why not? Why did that iron block not work? Okay. So when we are looking at, we say, okay, what are the tasks that somebody is trying to achieve? What is it that they're really trying to do? There is a concept called jobs to be done, right? Which is everybody has some particular task that they want to get done. So try and understand, when you're coming to design your products, understand what's the basic thing that somebody is trying to get done. It might be a functional thing, but it might also be emotional, right? Or, it might be just something that is something that somebody really just needs to get done, okay? So just be aware of the jobs to be done. Understand the influencers. What are the people, who are the people who are most influential, and how is that influence having an impact? And understand who those influencers are. We saw an example of that in the boating example when he spoke about earlier on in the keynote. And he said, well, actually, it was the mother and the children who were deciding. Immediately, first thing you think, it's the father who makes the decision. But actually, that was wrong. So who are the people who are going to influence that decision? What are their gains? What do they gain? And what are the pains that they have? And what are their feelings? So that's what we talk about, really getting into the shoes of your customer. Okay. So we spoke about observations. Constantly trying to see, like here he's observing the fact that these people have aluminum. They're using aluminum as opposed to iron, okay? Now, if I show you this example here, what do you see? What do you see from this picture? So just take a look for a minute and say, what do you see? Right. So you're seeing a picture, and remember when you look at something, a picture like this, there are two things that you come into. One is an assumption. You are going to immediately make some assumptions, and the other are facts. The fact of the matter is that guy is lying on the floor. An assumption could be that he is dead, right? But you might actually immediately jump to that conclusion and say, okay, he's dead. So what are these boys doing? What are the assumptions you're making here? And why are they just standing? What is this girl here trying to do? So when we are looking at stuff, keep in mind that we make assumptions and automatically think that they are facts. So there may be assumptions, and just be aware of the fact these are assumptions you're making, but the facts might be very different. Now, so we say, capture everything. Don't rely on memory. we start to write it down, okay? And the whole idea is let's experience design thinking, right? When we are doing this as an exercise, we try and experience what it is like to become a designer and to figure out how you might be designing a product. So going back to this example of designing healthy eating. So we are trying to see how you might entice children to be eating grapes or fruit as opposed to, or salads, as opposed to a hamburger. So if we did this as an exercise, we also do what we call time boxing. And this is very true even when you're looking at design sprints. You always say we time box it, so we just do certain things at a particular time. So just to make sure when you're constrained by time, you actually get your creative juices flowing and you start to work. So we have a big clock and we time everybody and we say, okay, this is when we do this is when we do that, etc. So here's just an example of, we start people to start thinking about this problem they're going to try and solve, and then they do this, we time box it so that they start at 10 o'clock, at 3 o'clock, they go and test out their solution, and then they come and present it to us. So the next part of this, right, is define. Now we've thought about empathy. Now we are going to start to look at the next phase, which is define. Define is now we are starting to figure out how do we solve this problem, okay? So try and imagine this, right? So first of all, we try and just go crazy and write down all the different ways that you can solve a particular problem. So we give 10 minutes, go out there. We do this, by the way, even in design sprints, where everybody on their own just work away 10 minutes coming up with different solutions. Then we take all those and we try and cluster it, right? We can figure out, you will find that there is a particular theme. So if I looked at the 10 or so tables here, there'll be the ducks, some of them will particularly look in one particular way, another set of ducks might look in a different way. So we might cluster the different solutions, right? And then maybe even put up a headline. And the key here is trying to get insights. It's all about trying to get real insights and understanding what is it that we are learning from this exercise. So this is an example from one of our classes that shows what we call space saturation. So people are coming up with over 100 Post-it notes. They're putting up the different ways of trying to solve this problem. So everybody working away, and they have over 100 Post-it notes up there. Then we are trying to find themes and seeing is there some sort of a pattern, and we put it on different clusters there. And then we say what the different themes are. So you come up and you get some different ideas. Then we start to, what we say, the headline, the clusters. And then we say, take one of these insights, take one of them, and now we try and figure out how we are going to go and implement this particular solution. And then we start to ideate. So we have defined, now we are trying to figure out what's the best way we are going to solve that particular solution. So Albert Einstein said, if I had an hour to solve a problem, I'd spend 55 minutes thinking about the problem and 5 minutes thinking about the solution. Actually, this is completely the reverse of what most people do, right? So we are going to pick one problem to focus on. It doesn't need to be the joy of waiting for everyone. Solving one problem for one group is great. right? So just take one, and actually in design sprint also we do this, right? We say, what's our sprint goal? Then pick the one that we really want to solve at that moment. What's the most important problem we are trying to solve? And we try and pick one. And then when you're coming to do this, and this is why I ran that short experiment, don't forget about the ducks, right? Don't forget that it doesn't have to follow a particular format. You might be able to do this inside out, the duck, right? So think about different ways of how you might solve the problem, okay? When you're looking at ideas, we have this concept of a bell. It's there in the video that I didn't play on the IDEO video on the shopping cart, which is when people come up with ideas, one of the main rules is that you don't say that's a bad idea. There is nothing called a bad idea. So you put everybody's idea, so it's, and there is nothing. If anybody says that's a bad idea, we ring a bell to say, you're breaking the rules, right? And every idea we tend to put on one Post-it. You try and figure out what are the insights you're going to get. You defer judgment, so there's no big discussion, right? No bad ideas. You're going for volume. Encourage people to come up with crazy ideas. And you're also trying to see how you might build on different people's ideas. And often, the best solution comes out by actually taking 2 or 3 of these ideas and being able to combine it together. And then you get this aha moment. And then you say, wow, that's the solution, okay? So the bell is there to stop negativity, right? And one idea per generation. And then we go, and we use this a lot in design sprints too, where people go and vote. And in design sprints, we do this anonymously, right? What I mean by that is nobody knows whose idea it is, so that people aren't necessarily thinking we need to, vote on the idea of our best friend or my boss because it'll look good. So the idea is when you come up with solutions, it's all done anonymously. So then now you're really at a level playing field, and you're all trying to come up and trying to find what's the best solution. And then you vote, and then we pick the one that has the highest vote, and we go off and do prototyping. Now people think, and you being developers, this may not be a problem. Often I do this with executive management, and people often think, okay, prototyping is really difficult. Actually, prototyping nowadays is really, really simple, right? Thanks to a lot of tools out there. We have explainer videos. Dropbox came up with a prototype initially, which really helped them for Dropbox to really take off when they were able to explain what Dropbox was about by doing a very simple, explainer video. It cost them $50,000, but today you don't need to spend that sort of money. In all my classes, people do explainer videos using Powtoons, or there are Video Scribe, or there are a number of very simple video editing tools that you can use to create explainer videos, right? There are lots of apps you can create as a prototype, right? So there are tools like Marvel, very simple. You can knock up a very simple iPad or iPhone or a Galaxy type of app using Marvel. So, to create prototypes is not as difficult as it used to be, because there are a lot, and most of these tools are free tools. Of course, there are the versions that you can pay for as well. So prototyping is actually quite easy. And as Steve Jobs says, a lot of time, people don't know what they want until you show it to them, right? That's really the prototyping part. So show, don't tell. Show people, and then they get a sense. And really, the whole idea behind this is so that you can very quickly build something and get some feedback, and then you're ready to go, right? And then we have our presentations. So here it says, the real voyage of discovery consists not in searching new landscapes, but in having new eyes. That really is your real voyage of discovery. Is you're not necessarily always looking out for new things, but you're starting to look at things with a new set of eyes. Right. So that really is what I wanted to cover here. So just to recap, remember there are 5 steps in this design thinking process. We have empathy, where we are really getting into the shoes of people and really understanding what is it that your customer wants. Then we start to define it to really, that's when we are starting to look at and really define what this problem is. Then we ideate, which is coming up with lots of different solutions. Then we pick one, we prototype, and then you test it. And you might keep going round and round this loop until you have really nailed this. Right? So I'll, as an ending statement, and then I'll take some questions from you. So we don't learn from experience, we learn from reflecting on the experience.
About the shopping cart experience that you were talking about, Dr. Raomal, you said you could invent a product, but time constraints, and the market might not accept it the way it is, right? But is it not part of design thinking to look at the time constraints and markets as well?
Absolutely.
Before you actually design a product like that?
You should be, well, I talk about looking at the environment first of all, but sometimes you can't predict how things might work out, right? It's really difficult to predict where the future is going. And if I want to get philosophical, my grandchildren now, they are being taught by teachers, but actually they are going to go into jobs that never existed today. So when they grow up in 15 years' time, right, we are teaching them stuff, but actually they're going to be doing jobs. 50% of those jobs do not exist today. So it's very, very difficult to predict the future. And that's really the challenge. But so you have to do the best under the circumstance. Okay. So I was at a Lean conference and I got these books. This is called, people talk about Lean Startup, right, which is from Eric Ries. I go every year for the Lean Startup conference. So, and then we have Agile, and then there is Design Thinking. So this book gives you an explanation of all 3 of them.
Thank you.
Okay.
Do you have any experience in trying to implement this sort of change in thinking paradigms in a sort of conservative company? And what are the challenges you faced and how you overcame them?
So I do a lot of consulting. And working, so I would have thought that working with the police was probably one of the most conservative types of companies, if you want to think of it as a company or as an organization. And so that was an interesting challenge. And the output from using something like this actually really flowed me. So for example, one group of officers, once and remember, were you there at the keynote today, right? So remember he said, put the customer first. So these people, and they were trying to figure out a problem in the prisons. And so they actually went to talk to prisoners, right? and to really get into their shoes to understand how they're going to solve a particular problem that they were having in the prisons. And the reason they did that was they started to believe in this concept of design thinking. But mega conservative, for most of this stuff, and I was fortunate that I was talking at the senior level, for most of this stuff to change has really got to come from the top. And that, I think, is one of the problems that we do have, because often lower down, people start to see this stuff and they accept it, right? But the senior people take a while because they keep doing the same thing over and over again. And Einstein said, you know, a definition of stupidity is doing the same thing over and over again and expecting a different result. And most people tend to do that. You know, if I just keep doing it, it's somehow going to change. So one of my first organizations as a young engineer, when I moved to Ireland, I was working for a company that developed standalone word processors. Hugely successful at the time. But nobody in that company saw the tsunami coming, right? The tsunami coming where a PC was coming and there was no need for a standalone word processor. The question that you should ask yourself if you're in a company, if you were in a company, and let's say you're in a taxi company, right? What would you do if one of your employees came up with this whole idea of Uber? Would you fire the person? And more often than not, yes, would be the answer. So it's getting a complete, and that keynote was really excellent because he said it's a change of mindset. We really need to change our mindset because we are living in a world where there is amazing innovation. And if we don't change mindsets, we are not going to be able to win in this world where things are just dramatically changing.
You in your process, you went from ideation to prototype. Yeah. Now, if there are any problem with the prototype, do we go to another idea or we
correct?
Put
yeah.
parameters?
No, there shouldn't be a problem with the prototype, right? There shouldn't be. I mean, when you say there's a problem with the prototype, it could mean two things. One is that you can't build the prototype, right? You should be able to, right? The other is that the prototype you built turns out that that's the wrong thing to do. Then you have to go right back and say, we thought this was the right solution, we got it wrong. Let's go back and figure out what the other solutions were. And that's the whole idea. The whole idea with all this stuff is that you're not spending 2 years building something that nobody wants, that you're really very quickly figuring out what's it that people want, and that you can very quickly say, yes, what I'm building is the right thing. So I hope you found that helpful. If anybody has any questions, I'm around. Okay, thank you very much. Thanks.